February 1st, 2026, 1:47 a.m. A doorbell camera in Tucson, Arizona begins recording. A masked figure approaches a house in the Catalina foothills. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, medium build, wearing dark clothing, gloves covering his hands, a backpack strapped to his shoulders. He moves calmly across the front porch, deliberately, with purpose, like someone who has done this before, like someone who knows exactly what he's doing and exactly how much time he has to do it. He approaches the doorbell camera, reaches toward it. His movements are methodical, practiced. He's not panicking. He's not rushing. He positions flower pots carefully, deliberately blocking camera angles. He works through his task with the focus of someone executing a plan that was designed long before this moment. For 41 minutes, he's on that camera, working, adjusting, preparing. At 2:28 a.m. inside the house, an 84-year-old woman's pacemaker disconnects from its monitoring system. The device that has been transmitting data about Nancy Guthrie's heart rate, her cardiac function, her vital signs to medical servers, suddenly stops sending signals. This isn't a battery failure. This isn't a technical malfunction. This happens when someone's heart goes into catastrophic distress, when severe physical trauma occurs, when someone is being moved beyond the Bluetooth range of the monitoring device, or when someone has already died. By 6:30 a.m., Nancy's son arrives at the house with a key. He's checking on his mother the way adult children check on aging parents who live alone. He approaches the front door and sees it immediately. Blood on the porch. Not pools of it, not a crime scene that screams violence from across the yard, but enough. Smeared across the concrete. Dragged. A trail that tells a story of struggle, of movement, of something terrible that happened in the darkness while the rest of the neighborhood slept. He opens the door, calls for his mother. No answer. He walks through the house, room by room, his concern escalating with each empty doorway. Her bedroom is disturbed. The bed looks like someone left it in a hurry or was taken from it against their will. Her purse sits on the kitchen counter where it always sits. Her phone is on the nightstand, exactly where she places it every night before bed. Her medications are lined up on the bathroom counter, the daily routine of an 84-year-old woman who takes her health seriously. Her car is in the garage, untouched. Her glasses are on the table next to her favorite reading chair. Everything is there. Everything except Nancy. By noon on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie is officially reported missing. Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrive at the scene. They process what they're seeing. They understand immediately that this isn't a case of an elderly woman wandering off confused. This isn't someone who forgot to charge their phone and went for a walk. This is an abduction. This is a crime scene. This is an 84-year-old woman who was taken from her home by force in the middle of the night. And that masked figure captured on the doorbell camera for 41 minutes becomes, overnight, the most wanted person in America. The FBI releases the footage publicly on February 10th. Within hours, it's on every news channel. CNN runs it. Fox News runs it. NBC, where Nancy's daughter Savannah co-hosts the Today Show, runs it with the sound of Savannah's voice breaking as she pleads for her mother's return. The footage is shared millions of times across social media. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Everyone sees it. Everyone watches that masked figure move across Nancy's porch. Everyone studies the walk, the build, the mannerisms, the way he carries himself. Someone somewhere should recognize him. In a nation of 330 million people, in a state of 7 million, in a city of 500,000. Someone should know who this person is. The way he walks should be familiar to someone. That particular gait, that specific build, those movements that are unique to every human being should trigger recognition in someone's memory. A coworker should think, that looks like the guy from the warehouse. A neighbor should think, that walks like the guy who lives 3 streets over. A family member should think, that moves like my cousin, my nephew, my son. But 3 months pass, 90 days, 13 weeks, and no one comes forward. No one calls the tip line that's been set up specifically for this case. No one identifies him. Not a coworker who has watched him walk across a parking lot every day for years. Not a neighbor who has seen him on the street. Not a family member who has sat across from him at dinner tables. Not a friend who has stood next to him at bars. Not an ex-girlfriend who has memorized the way he moves. Not anyone. 30,000 tips came into law enforcement in the first weeks after that footage was released. 30,000 people called or emailed or submitted online forms saying they had information. 30,000 leads that investigators had to follow up on, verify, cross-reference, eliminate. And after processing all of those tips, after following every lead that seemed even remotely credible, after 3 months of the most intensive investigation the Tucson area has seen in years, law enforcement still has no identification, no name, no suspect, no arrest. How is that possible? How does a person captured on camera for 41 minutes, whose footage has been analyzed frame by frame by millions of people, whose image has been enhanced and brightened and slowed down and studied by professional investigators and amateur sleuths and everyone in between, remain completely unidentified for 90 days? Here's the theory that criminal profilers are now putting forward. Criminal profilers who have spent decades studying violent crime, who have interviewed serial killers in prison, who have sat across tables from murderers and rapists and kidnappers, and asked them over and over, why did you do it? How did you do it? What were you thinking? What was your plan? Criminal profilers who have built databases of criminal behavior by talking to 1,500 offenders using 840 question protocols designed to extract every detail of criminal thinking. Criminal profilers whose careers have been built on understanding exactly how crimes like this work and exactly what kind of minds plan them. The theory is this: the person on that doorbell camera is already dead, eliminated, murdered, killed by the very person who hired him to kidnap Nancy Guthrie, silenced within hours, maybe within 24 hours, certainly within days of Nancy's disappearance, buried somewhere in the vast Arizona desert that surrounds Tucson, in terrain so expansive that even with drones and dogs and thermal imaging, a body could remain hidden for years or decades or forever. And the reason no one has identified him is simple. You can't identify a dead man whose death has never been reported. You can't recognize someone who no longer exists in the places where people knew him. You can't call in a tip about someone whose absence from daily life has been explained away or dismissed or not even noticed, because the kind of person you hire to do a job like this is exactly the kind of person whose disappearance doesn't ring alarm bells. This isn't a story about one person kidnapping an 84-year-old woman. This is a story about a puppet master, a mastermind, a person who orchestrated an entire criminal operation from the shadows while someone else did all the physical work and appeared on all the cameras and left all the evidence. This is a story about someone smart enough to hire an accomplice, ruthless enough to eliminate that accomplice when the job was done, and cold enough to watch an 84-year-old woman's family suffer for 3 months while feeling absolutely nothing. This is the story of why the masked figure in that doorbell footage may already be buried somewhere in the desert outside Tucson. and why the real killer, the person who planned every detail of this operation, who orchestrated Nancy's disappearance, who is responsible for her being gone, is still out there, still free, still watching, still thinking they got away with it. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me if you think the person on that doorbell camera is still alive, or if the puppet master theory makes sense. Share this video if you believe Nancy Guthrie deserves justice, not just for the person who physically took her, but for whoever sent that person to her door and then killed them to cover their tracks. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when DNA results come back from the FBI lab at Quantico, when genetic genealogy identifies the person on camera, when investigators start looking for a body in the desert, you need to understand the full picture of what really happened on February 1st. Now, let's talk about who Nancy Guthrie was, because understanding the woman at the center of this helps us understand why someone would go through such an elaborate, risky, complicated operation to make her disappear. Because this wasn't simple. This wasn't easy. This wasn't random. This took planning, preparation, surveillance, coordination. And people don't do that kind of work unless there's a reason. Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She grew up during World War II, came of age in the 1950s, graduated high school in 1960, entered college at a time when women finishing higher education was still considered unusual or even suspicious by many Americans. Nancy didn't care what was considered unusual. She was brilliant, genuinely, measurably smart. She graduated from the University of Kentucky with a degree she earned because she believed education mattered, because she believed knowledge was valuable, because she believed women should pursue learning for its own sake, regardless of what society expected them to do with it. On December 28, 1963, Nancy married Charles Errol Guthrie. He was a mining engineer, and his career would shape the next 2 decades of their lives together. Mining engineering in the 1960s and 70s meant going where the work was. It meant moving to different states, different countries, different continents. It meant adaptability. And Nancy, who could have insisted on staying in Kentucky near her family, who could have demanded stability and predictability and roots, chose adventure instead. She chose to raise 3 children while moving from place to place, state to state, country to country, learning new cultures, adapting to new climates, making new friends, starting over again and again. In the early 1970s, Charles's career took the family to Melbourne, Australia. They lived there for years. It was in Melbourne in 1971 that their youngest daughter, Savannah, was born. Savannah would grow up to become one of the most recognizable faces on American television, co-hosting the Today Show on NBC, interviewing presidents and celebrities and disaster survivors, becoming a fixture in millions of American homes every weekday morning. But in 1971, she was just Nancy and Charles's baby girl, born far from home, in a country on the other side of the world. 2 years later, in 1973, the Guthrie family left Melbourne and settled permanently in Tucson, Arizona. They bought a house in the Catalina foothills, a neighborhood that climbs into the Santa Catalina Mountains on the north side of Tucson. The house was built in the burnt adobe style typical of the region. It sat on a large lot with views of the mountains, with desert landscape surrounding it, with saguaro cacti standing like sentries in sunsets that painted the sky in colors that don't seem possible until you see them with your own eyes. That house became Nancy's anchor. It became the center of her world. It was where her children grew up, where Savannah learned to read and ride a bike, and eventually left for college and career. It was where Christmas mornings happened with wrapping paper scattered across the living room floor. It was where birthday cakes were baked and candles were blown out and wishes were made. It was where family dinners happened around a table with everyone talking at once. It was where ordinary life, in all its messy, beautiful detail, unfolded year after year. Nancy worked while raising her children. She had a career. She worked in public relations at the University of Arizona for nearly 2 decades. Her colleagues, when interviewed by police after Nancy disappeared, described her the same way over and over. She made difficult work feel manageable. She remembered your birthday without needing a calendar reminder. She asked about your kids by name and actually listened to the answer. She made you feel valued just by the way she paid attention when you spoke. She was the kind of coworker who makes an office feel less like a workplace and more like a community. When she retired, people missed her. Not the position she filled, her, the person she was. And then in 1988, everything changed in a single day. Charles Guthrie died suddenly during a work trip to Mexico, a cardiac event. He was there one day, alive, working, planning to come home, and gone the next. Nancy was 46 years old. She was a widow. She had 3 children still living at home. Savannah was just 16, still in high school, still at an age where you need your parents to be stable and present and able to hold things together when the world falls apart. Nancy did exactly that. She didn't remarry, she didn't sell the house and move back to Kentucky near her family. She didn't retreat into grief and let it consume her the way grief consumes some people who lose their partners too young. She stayed in Tucson. She stayed in that house. She kept working. She kept showing up at St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church every Sunday morning. She kept being present for her children as they finished high school, went to college, started careers, got married, had children of their own. Savannah would later say in interviews after Nancy disappeared that her mother met every hard moment in life with iron discipline and unshakable faith. Nancy didn't fall apart when things got difficult. She didn't crumble. She held the family together through the worst thing that had ever happened to them. For 38 years after Charles died, Nancy lived alone in that house. 38 years. More than a third of a century. She never remarried. Friends would ask her gently if she ever thought about dating again, if she ever felt lonely rattling around in that big house by herself. Nancy's answer was always the same. I had my great love. That was Charles. I'm content. And she was content. She attended church every Sunday without fail, sitting in the same pew, singing the same hymns she'd been singing for decades. She volunteered. She played golf at local courses, not competitively, but for the joy of being outside in the Arizona sunshine, for the friendship of the women she played with, for the walking and talking and ritual of it. She baked cookies for her grandchildren, using recipes she'd perfected over years of practice. She sent care packages to family members away at college or living in other states. Boxes packed with snacks and notes and small gifts that said, "I'm thinking about you. You're not forgotten." She stayed sharp. This is important. This matters. Sheriff Chris Nanos, who is not known for giving compliments easily, who has been criticized throughout this investigation for various decisions and statements, said publicly and repeatedly that Nancy Guthrie, at 84 years old, was sharp as a tack. Her mind was intact. Her judgment was sound. Her memory was clear. She wasn't confused, She wasn't forgetful in any way that suggested cognitive decline. She wasn't experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's or anything that would make her vulnerable to manipulation or unable to make her own decisions about her life, her money, her property, her future. Nancy Guthrie at 84 knew exactly what was happening in her life. She paid her bills, she managed her accounts, she drove herself places, she made her own appointments, she lived independently and capably. And when something felt wrong, when something didn't add up, when something made her uncomfortable, she acted on it. She didn't ignore warning signs, she didn't dismiss her own instincts. She had a routine, a structure to her days. And in January 2026, someone learned that routine. Someone studied it. Someone watched her closely enough to know exactly when she would be alone, when she would be vulnerable, when she would be unable to call for help. Someone spent time, possibly weeks, possibly longer, understanding the patterns of Nancy Guthrie's daily life. January 11th, 2026. 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Late at night, probably close to midnight, Aldine, Nancy's neighbor, got up to use the bathroom. Aldine has lived on that street for decades. She knows the neighborhood. She knows the rhythms of it, the sounds, the normal patterns of who comes and goes. When she looked out her bathroom window, she saw something unusual. Someone was walking down the street, not jogging. People jog in this neighborhood sometimes, early morning or evening when it's cooler. Not walking a dog. People walk dogs, and you can tell because there's a leash and the walker stops frequently while the dog sniffs things. This was just a person walking. Slowly, looking at houses, stopping, staring, particularly staring at Nancy's house. This struck Aldine as strange. This isn't a walking neighborhood. The houses are set far back from the street on large lots, sometimes an acre or more of land. They're separated by desert vegetation, cacti, brush, rocks. The streets wind and curve. There are no sidewalks. There are no streetlights because of local ordinances designed to reduce light pollution for the astronomical observatories in the mountains. At night, these streets are pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. People don't wander around on foot in the dark here. You're in your car. You drive into your garage. You close the garage door behind you. You're inside your house. That's the pattern. But Aldine didn't call police. It was odd, not threatening. Maybe a new resident getting to know the area. Maybe someone whose car broke down. Maybe someone just taking a late-night walk because they couldn't sleep. Unusual, yes, but not alarming enough to pick up the phone and report. 3 weeks later, on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And suddenly that person walking down the street, stopping to stare at Nancy's house, became critical evidence. Aldine called the FBI immediately. She told them what she'd seen on January 11th, and the FBI took her seriously. Agents came to Aldine's house multiple times. They interviewed her extensively. They asked for every detail she could remember. What time was it? What was the person wearing? Could she estimate height, build? How did they move? Which direction were they walking? How long did they stop in front of Nancy's house? Did they walk up the driveway? Did they approach the door? Which other houses did they look at? How long were they visible? Where did they go when they left? The FBI came back and back again, re-interviewing Aldine, asking the same questions in different ways, trying to extract every possible detail from her memory, using techniques designed to help witnesses recall things they didn't even know they'd noticed. Because that person walking on January 11th wasn't a neighbor out for a stroll. That was surveillance. That was reconnaissance. That was someone learning the terrain, the camera positions, the sight lines, the distances between houses, the street layouts, the places where someone could approach unseen. Someone was scouting Nancy's house 3 weeks before they came back to take her. And that level of preparation, that level of planning, tells investigators something crucial. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't someone who saw an elderly woman and decided on the spot to commit a crime. This was planned carefully, over time, with intention. And now let's talk about the night of February 1st, 2026. Because the details of what happened that night, the timeline, the logistics, the physical evidence, all point to something that criminal profilers and homicide detectives with decades of experience agree on. One person could not have done this alone. Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie spends the evening with family. She's at her daughter Annie's house about 4 miles from her own home. They have dinner together. They play games. It's an ordinary family evening, the kind Nancy has had hundreds of times over the years with her children and their spouses and her grandchildren. Around 9:45 p.m., after dinner is finished and the games are done, someone drives Nancy home. Family members watch her walk into her house. They see her turn on lights inside. She appears in the window, waves to let them know she's safely inside. They drive away. That's the last time anyone who loves Nancy Guthrie sees her alive and well and in her own home, where she's supposed to be safe. At 9:48 p.m., Nancy's garage door opens and closes. This is recorded by the garage door's automated system. She's parking her car, or someone is, and the garage closes behind the vehicle. Nancy is home. She's probably getting ready for bed now, taking her medications. The careful routine of an 84-year-old woman managing multiple prescriptions, brushing her teeth, changing into pajamas, taking out her hearing aids, which she does every night, leaving them in the small case on her bathroom counter, checking her phone one last time, plugging in her pacemaker monitoring device, getting into bed. It's Saturday night. Tomorrow morning, Sunday, she'll watch church online with her group of friends. They do this every week. They've been doing it for years. Nancy never misses it. It's part of her routine, part of her life structure. She's already looking forward to it. At 1:47 a.m., 5 hours and 59 minutes after Nancy's garage door closes, her doorbell camera begins recording. The masked figure appears, and for the next 41 minutes, he's on camera, working through whatever he came there to do, moving flower pots, positioning them to block camera angles, working on the doorbell camera itself, testing it, understanding how it works. At 2:28 a.m. inside the house, Nancy's pacemaker disconnects from its monitoring system. The device that has been steadily transmitting data about her heart function stops sending signals, not gradually, suddenly. At exactly 2:28 a.m., the transmission ends. This tells investigators several possible things. Nancy's heart could be in severe distress from fear, from struggle, from violence. She could be having a cardiac event, a heart attack or arrhythmia triggered by terror or physical trauma. She could be being moved from her bedroom, carried, or dragged beyond the Bluetooth range of the monitoring device on her nightstand. Or she could already be dead. Her heart could have already stopped. The pacemaker could have already failed because there's no longer a heartbeat to regulate. By 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning, Nancy's son arrives at the house. He has a key. He's checking on his mother the way adult children check on aging parents, especially parents who live alone. And he immediately knows something is wrong. There's blood on the front porch. He goes inside, calls for his mother. No answer. Her bedroom is disturbed. The bed doesn't look normal. It looks like someone left in a hurry or was pulled from it. Her purse is on the kitchen counter where she always keeps it. Her phone is on the nightstand. Her medications are on the bathroom counter in their usual arrangement. Her car is in the garage. Her reading glasses are on the table next to her chair. Her hearing aids are in their case. Everything Nancy needs to live her life is there. Everything except Nancy herself. By noon, Nancy Guthrie is officially reported missing. And this is where the critical analysis of what happened begins. Because Chris McDonald, a retired homicide detective with 36 years of experience, many of those years spent working violent crimes and homicides, looked at the evidence and the timeline and the logistics of this case, and reached a conclusion that he explains with the methodical clarity of someone who has worked hundreds of crime scenes. You have to think about the management of Nancy once they get her out of the house. There was some type of vehicle that was used to remove her from those premises. Now you have to ask yourself, from a behavioral analysis perspective, where is the vehicle positioned? If the plan was to take her out the back of the house, through the back gate, you would logically position a vehicle back there, near the garage and the gate, so you could move her from the house to the car quickly without being seen from the street. But that's not where the evidence points us. The blood evidence is at the front of the house, on the front porch, running down the front walkway, which means something changed. Something went wrong, or the plan changed, or the original exit strategy didn't work. So now the suspect has to do one of two things. Option A. He tells Nancy to stay where she is while he moves the car around from the back to the front. But that doesn't make any sense if she's injured and bleeding. You can't leave someone in that condition while you go move a vehicle. She could call for help. She could try to escape. She could collapse. You can't leave her. Option B. He already has the car positioned at the front, and that's why he's taking her out the front door. But then, why did he prepare the back exit? Why position flower pots and tamper with cameras at the front if the plan was always to use the back? It doesn't add up logically for a single person. The answer is, this wasn't a single-person operation. There had to be at least one other person, at minimum 2 people, someone inside the house managing Nancy, controlling her, dealing with the situation as it unfolds, and someone outside managing the vehicle, ready to drive, ready to transport, ready to get them out of that neighborhood as fast as possible once Nancy is in the car. Because you cannot physically control an 84-year-old woman who is injured and bleeding and fighting back and simultaneously operate a vehicle. The logistics don't work. One person can't do both things at the same time. You need 2 people minimum, one to control the victim, one to control the vehicle. The blood evidence supports this 2-person theory. Crime scene investigators documented the blood trail carefully. It starts at Nancy's front door, right at the threshold where the interior of the house meets the exterior porch. It continues across the porch in a pattern consistent with someone being dragged or someone bleeding while being moved. It runs down the front walkway, that path from the porch to the street. And it stops, abruptly, at the edge of the asphalt. That stopping point tells investigators exactly where a vehicle was parked. Nancy was loaded into a car at that precise location. Someone opened a vehicle door. Someone lifted her or pushed her or helped her or forced her into a car. And someone was behind the wheel of that car, ready to drive away the moment the door closed. 2 people, minimum, working together, coordinating, executing a plan that required one person to be inside handling Nancy and one person to be outside managing the escape. 2 people committing a crime together. 2 people who both know what happened. Two people who are now bound together by shared guilt and shared risk. Two people who both face life in prison or worse if they're caught. And here is where the puppet master theory becomes not just plausible, but probable. Because when two people commit a serious crime together, when both of them know every detail of what happened, when both of them can identify each other, when both of them face equal consequences, if the crime is solved, those two people become each other's biggest liability. And when the Guthrie family announced a $1.2 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery, that partnership became lethal. Dr. Gary Brucato, a criminal psychologist who has spent years studying violent crime, explaining criminal behavior to law enforcement, teaching at universities, publishing research on mass murder and severe mental illness, and how psychology intersects with criminality, explained the dynamics using a restaurant analogy that makes the relationship clear. Think of it like a restaurant. You have a chef and a waiter. The chef is in the back, creating the menu, planning the dishes, designing how everything will be prepared. The chef is the mastermind. The waiter is visible to the public. The waiter takes orders. The waiter serves the food. The waiter is the face of the operation. But the waiter didn't create the menu. The waiter is executing someone else's plan. In this case, the person we see on the doorbell camera is the waiter. He's visible. He's on camera. He's doing the physical work. But he didn't plan this operation. He's executing orders from the chef, from the mastermind, from the person who designed this entire thing and stayed safely out of camera range while someone else did the risky work. And here's what happens when you're the waiter and you've just helped commit a major felony and you know there's a $1.2 million reward on the table. You start doing math. You start thinking about whether loyalty to the chef is worth more than $1.2 million and a deal with prosecutors. You start realizing that the first person to talk to police gets immunity or reduced charges. You start understanding that if you turn in the chef, you might walk away from this with money and freedom instead of decades in prison. And the chef knows you're doing that math. The chef knows that $1.2 million destroys loyalty. The chef knows the partnership is over the moment that reward is announced. And the chef knows there's only one way to guarantee you never talk. Dr. Ann Burgess, the forensic nurse whose work literally inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter, who interviewed serial killers with FBI agents to help create the Behavioral Analysis Unit, who has studied criminal psychology for longer than most investigators have been alive, stated the conclusion even more directly when asked about this case. The person we see at the front door could be dead, killed by someone else, killed by the boss. It was well planned. They got away with it, and they form a type of case that we've never seen before, as far as we know. The person on camera is dead, eliminated, removed, silenced permanently, because a $1.2 million reward is life-changing money. It's not $25,000 that someone might resist claiming because it's not quite enough to matter. It's not $100,000 that could pay off some debts, but wouldn't fundamentally change your life. It's $1.2 million. That's enough to disappear to another country. That's enough to never work again. That's enough to make betraying your partner in crime not just tempting, but logical. And the puppet master, the mastermind, the person who planned this operation and hired someone expendable to execute it, knew from the beginning that this moment would come. Knew that once a major reward was announced, the accomplice would become impossible to trust. Knew that the only way to guarantee silence was to make speech impossible. Within 24 hours of Nancy's disappearance, maybe 48 hours, certainly before that reward was announced, the accomplice was dead, eliminated, probably killed and buried somewhere in the vast desert surrounding Tucson. In terrain so expansive that the United Cajun Navy, a volunteer search and rescue organization with sophisticated equipment including thermal imaging drones and trained cadaver dogs, offered to search and was completely ignored by the sheriff's office. Brian from the United Cajun Navy explained their capabilities and their frustration. We have thermal drones that can detect heat signatures from significant distances. We have multiple cadaver dog teams that can work in rotation because in that desert heat, dogs can only work for limited periods before they need rest. We submitted detailed proposals to the sheriff's office. We offered to search specific areas. We asked for guidance about where they wanted us to focus. We got no response, no meeting, no acknowledgement, nothing. And here's what people don't understand about these searches. We almost always find something. Sometimes it's related to the case we're searching for. Sometimes it's human remains from a different case entirely. Someone else's missing person, another family that finally gets closure. Sometimes it's evidence from unsolved crimes. The desert doesn't hide things as well as people think, but you have to actually go out there and search. Why would a sheriff's office turn down free help from experienced searchers with professional equipment? Why would law enforcement reject assistance from people who have successfully found missing persons in other cases? Maybe because they don't want volunteers accidentally stumbling onto two bodies, Nancy's and the accomplices. Maybe because finding both victims at once would confirm the puppet master theory and create a double homicide investigation before they're ready to move on it. Maybe because they're already developing their own case and don't want civilian searchers contaminating potential evidence. Or maybe, as sources have suggested, it's simpler and darker than that. The sheriff didn't want the Cajun Navy succeeding where his department had failed, didn't want to give credit to volunteers, didn't want to admit his team needed help. Ego trumping investigation, pride trumping justice. Either way, the desert remains largely unsearched by anyone except law enforcement.
And if the accomplice is buried out there, if the puppet master eliminated him and buried him somewhere in those thousands of square miles of Arizona desert, he could stay there for decades or forever. And this is why no one has identified the person on the doorbell camera after 3 months. Because you can't identify someone whose death has never been reported. Because the kind of person you hire for a job like this, the kind of person desperate enough or drug-addicted enough or criminal enough to kidnap an 84-year-old woman for money, is exactly the kind of person whose sudden absence doesn't trigger immediate alarm. Dr. Brucato believes drugs play a central role in this case. I think if this person got any money out of this operation, where would they spend it? Drugs, sex workers, things like that. And I would be willing to bet that this individual had a history of engaging with sex workers locally and with people dealing drugs. Those communities should be questioned. Someone in those circles knows him, recognized him from the footage. But they're not coming forward. A drug addict, someone with debts, someone who needed money fast, someone who didn't ask too many questions about why they were being paid to take an old woman from her house, someone whose lifestyle meant that people who knew him were accustomed to him disappearing for days or weeks at a time, someone whose absence could be explained away as just another binge, just another arrest in another city, just another decision to skip town ahead of consequences. That's who you hire when you want someone expendable. That's who you eliminate when the job is done. And that's why his family, if he has family that cares, hasn't reported him missing. Because people like that go missing all the time in their world, and they always eventually resurface until the time they don't. But no one realizes that's what happened. Nancy Ellen Guthrie.
Born January 27, 1942. A mother, a grandmother, a woman who worked hard, raised 3 children, survived her husband's death, built a life in Tucson that spanned more than 5 decades. A woman who went to church every Sunday, who baked cookies, who played golf, who read books, who sent cards on birthdays, who called family members just to check in, who was, by every account, kind and thoughtful and present in other people's lives. She deserved to be safe in her own home. She deserved a system that protected vulnerable elderly people living alone. She deserved neighbors watching out for her. She deserved an investigation that moved fast and smart and used every resource available. What she got was someone who spent weeks surveilling her house, someone who hired an accomplice to take her, someone who eliminated that accomplice within hours or days, and someone who is still out there, still free, still watching, still believing they got away with it. The person on camera may already be dead, but justice isn't. The FBI is processing DNA, running genetic genealogy, building family trees, getting closer. And when they identify the person on camera, when they trace him to a name and an address and a last known location, when they start looking for him and realize he disappeared in early February, when they find his body in the desert and confirm he died shortly after Nancy disappeared, the entire case will shift. Because then it becomes a double homicide. 2 murders, 2 victims, and a puppet master who thought eliminating the accomplice would eliminate the evidence. If you know anything about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, call the FBI. 1-800-CALL-FBI. The $1.2 million reward is real. Your information could identify not just the accomplice, but the mastermind. Could solve 2 murders instead of 1. Could bring Nancy home. Could give Savannah answers. The person on camera is already dead, but the person who sent him there is alive, and the FBI is coming.